Hi, I'm just going to be sending a quick email out. Oh, yay, there are some people.
Yeah, I've been in here for since 2:50, I believe.
Yeah, I had a small emergency that I just, sucked up my afternoon.
That's okay, no worries.
I'm going to send an email around if I can find, there we go. Okay, announcements, read announcements. So I'm just sending an email, those of you who've been chiming in, I'm just sending an email. All right. What do we got? Oh, we've only got a few people, but that's okay. Hopefully some other people will show up. Otherwise, they'll be able to watch. I apologize again for, for showing up late. Things are just been a little bit crazy around here this morning. So.
No worries, it happens. I was about to email you, wondering if we had class. I don't know if somebody what, but I was confused for a second. But that would happen when I have class because it's just towards the end of the semester, so I don't blame you.
Yeah, well, it happens to you guys sometimes. Something
Oh
comes.
yeah, like I said, I woke up and I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
Like, is it really Tuesday? Like, is it class
Yeah.
day? I don't know. Never happens during the beginning of the semester though. It's always at the end.
Well, it happened for me today, so we'll see. Hopefully some people will get the email and show up. Announcements, as always, there's a review quiz that's up now. And I'm going to post a few short answer questions after class on Thursday. And those will be due on Sunday, May 7th. And that is the end of our semester. So we have class today and on Thursday. Yeah, this is a good class, and you guys have been good. You guys have been a good class. We've had good questions, good interactions. Things have gone really well this semester. All right. So last time we met, we were talking about invasive bird species. And we're going to talk now about parrots, specifically feral parrots in the United States. There are at least 25 non-native species of parrots breeding in the wild in the US. There are only 2 native parrots to the US. The one on the left here, this is a Carolina parakeet. It was driven to extinction by hunting and deforestation in 1918. And the one on the right is the thick-billed parrot. It was found in New Mexico and Arizona until the 1930s, when it was driven out by hunting and logging and development. But it is still in existence in Mexico. And in theory, it could come back over the border because the habitat is fine for it in parts of Arizona and New Mexico. So these are not the feral species of parrots. These are the native species. When we talk about native parrots, the monk parakeet is probably the most numerous feral parrot in the United States. These birds were imported to the United States in large numbers in the 50s and 60s. And like a lot of parrots, people found them to be very noisy, very messy, demanding, and nowadays we do a better job, most people do a better job in trying to rehome parrots. But in the 40s and 50s, they were just releasing them into the wild. As of now, they can be found in at least 21 different states. They've got good populations in New York City and Chicago. And there is a population in Boston. I don't know that they have successfully bred in Boston. They may have migrated up from New York, but they're trying. They've built nests in Boston. And this is a picture of one of their nests on a power pole. These nests are multi-family, so you get multiple pairs nesting in the same nest. And they love urban structures like power poles because these provide really good support for their nests. But of course, the downside is with electricity running through these wires, sometimes they catch fire and cause blackouts and all kinds of stuff. Now, that's the most common species. The most diversity of feral parrot populations can be found in Texas, Florida, and California. No big surprise there. Parrots are largely found in warm climates, and these are the warm states. There are more than 35 different species that breed in the Miami area, including blue and gold macaws. And the blue and gold macaws in the Miami area are actively being poached. So people are finding the nesting sites for these macaws, taking the babies out and selling them for the pet trade. These birds do not have legal protections because they are not considered a native species. In California, there are big populations all up and down the southern half of the state, all the way up to San Francisco. This is a photo from someone's deck in suburban San Francisco. So you can see there are a lot of parrots. And of course, they're feeding them to attract them. The parrot populations in San Francisco are on the decline because of secondary exposure to rat poisons. So, you know, this is one of my things. Rat poison is hard. I mean, it's cruel to the rats, and then it gets into the food chain and kills dogs and cats and other things. Kinley, go ahead.
I somehow can't see the slide. I'm looking at Ronit's name. Somehow, Ronit, I can see your name in my screen.
Okay, that's weird.
Well, hello, Kinley.
Hi, you have a lovely name. I just don't know what's going on with my screen. That's hilarious.
Can anybody else see the screen, or is everybody just looking at? Okay,
I can see the screen.
I see the slides.
I see
Okay,
a bird eating an apple, unless that's Ronit too.
I don't know what's going on with your computer today, Kinley. It's just
Kinley, see if it's pinned or what your view is, whether it's sort of in gallery or speaker.
Okay.
we're having all kinds of problems here today. if you roll over the window that has the part, is it the whole screen?
I just found it now. Thank you.
Okay, you got it? Good.
Bye, Kinley.
Bye, Ronate.
As you guys have probably, I've mentioned, I'm living in Southern California. We have at least 2 different species of parrot that I have seen in my neighborhood. One is the Nande conure, and the other one is an Amazon parrot, but I'm not sure which one. They're hard to identify in flight. And then in Phoenix, there's a population of around 2,000 rosy-faced lovebirds. So lovebirds are a warm weather species, but in their native range, which is in Africa, temperatures rarely get over 100 degrees. And Phoenix regularly gets over 100 degrees and sometimes over 110. In 2019, Phoenix had 103 days when the temperature reached at least 100. In their native habitat, when it does get warm, they use water to stay cool and hydrated on hot days. Arizona is a desert. So how are these lovebirds surviving in these conditions? Well, they're clever and they're adaptable. This is a commercial air conditioning vent, and the air coming out of the air conditioning vent this is how the air conditioners keep cool. It's a few degrees cooler than the surrounding air, and it's just enough to make the difference for these birds so that they can survive. Pretty wild. Okay, I think we've gotten everybody showing up. Sorry for the late start today. Things were crazy around here, and I just couldn't get on the computer until late. But I'm going to do the announcements real quick because I know a lot of you guys came in late because I was late. So there is a review quiz that's up now, and there will be a short answer series of questions posted after lecture on Thursday. These are both going to be due on Sunday, May 7th. Our last class is going to be Thursday. So we are right here at the end of the semester. Okay, so our next topic is bird banding. In Britain, this is called bird ringing. I guess they're putting a ring on it. Is that joke too old? Bird banding is putting a permanent aluminum ID band on a bird's leg. These bands are designed to stay attached permanently, and they can last for years or decades. The length of time these last depend on the behaviors of the bird. Birds that get in the water, swimming birds, especially those who get in salt water, that's going to wear out the bands faster. Birds that their legs scrape against vegetation or rocks a lot, that's going to shorten the lifespan of the birds. And for particularly long-lived species, like the albatrosses, these bands need to be replaced. It's a little easier to do that on albatross because they tend to nest in the same locations year after year, so you can manage to do this. It's a lot harder to replace bands on things like this little warbler here. First off, are you going to even notice the band is worn out? Only if the bird is caught at a banding station, pretty much. The longest a bird has been banded is Wisdom, who is a Laysan albatross. She is at least 71 years old and was originally banded in 1956, 67 years ago. Her band has been replaced 6 times. So that's a pretty good lifespan for that band. Each band has a unique number, which is, I mean, you can see part of the number here. That's not the whole number. So it wraps around the band. It's very hard to read in the field. You pretty much have to have these birds in hand to read the whole number. But that number is unique to that bird. This gull will always have this number that ends in, I think it's at the end, 2406. That is that bird's unique identification number. This bird, that number on his band, actually, I'm not sure with that one. That number is always going to be associated with that individual band. If you find a band, what are the bands for? Identifying individuals. We're going to talk about the research as we go through this lecture. So if you ever find a bird band, chances are you're going to find it on a deceased bird. If you find it, you need to, ideally, you'll report it to the U.S. Geological Survey. They are the owners of the Bird Banding Laboratory, which is the government organization that oversees all of these bands. Even if the band looks to be too worn out and you cannot read it, you can mail it to them and they can do various procedures to raise the number back up and eventually be able to read it. So there are a lot of research projects where you need to be able to identify individual birds. We're going to walk through a whole bunch of things that we learn from banded birds. The first thing we're going to talk about is population size. So there is a type of study that is used in ecology to estimate population size. The first thing you do is you capture a bunch of whatever species you're looking at. Then you mark them and you release them. So in birds, banding is a great way to mark them. And then a little while later, how long, it depends on the species, you recapture whatever you're looking at. And then there's some math. It's not too complicated math, but this is not a math class and we're not going to do math. But there's math that you can do to estimate the total population size. It doesn't work during migration season with birds, but during breeding season or during winter, it works really perfectly fine. And that's called a mark recapture study. We might use, in fact, we do use bird banding to estimate lifespan in the wild. So with wild, when you're looking at the lifespan of wild animals, the lifespan in captivity can often be very different from that you see in the wild. For some types of animals, they're going to live a lot longer in captivity than in the wild. They've got a reliable food source. They don't have predators to worry about. That's a longer life expectancy. Other species live longer in the wild because our methods of keeping them in captivity are not meeting the needs of that particular species. So a lot of types of snakes do not live as long in captivity as they do in the wild. With birds, we know that pet birds tend not to live as long in the wild. Is banding similar to GPS collars? We can actually, there are GPS backpacks basically that we can stick on birds nowadays, not the smallest ones, but we are limited in size for them, but it is kind of similar to GPS collars on mammals. Yeah. Okay, so if we're looking at lifespans in the wild, this is actually a little bit easier type of experiment. You band nestlings. So the birds are still in the nest, close to being fledglings, but not quite there yet. Once, remember that when birds leave the nest, they are full-sized, and that includes their legs. So when you put that permanent band on the leg, if you're late stage nestling just before fledgling, you don't have to worry. The bird is never going to outgrow that band. Their legs do not get fat, so you don't have to worry about cutting off the circulation. Birds do not age like mammals. So dogs, cats, people, as we get older, you know, you get gray hair, gray muzzle on dogs, not showing as much high a level of activity. In us, of course, we also get wrinkles on our face and hands, and our skin gets a lot of changes. Birds don't do that. You cannot look at a bird once it has reached reproductive age and determine how old it is. It's going to look the same from as soon as it reaches adulthood, basically to the end of its life. Birds also tend to live longer than mammals. So when we think about mammals, there is a relationship between size and longevity. So smaller mammals tend not to live as long as larger mammals. The same is true in birds. Smaller birds don't tend to live as long as larger ones. But if we're comparing similar size species, and one of them's a bird and the other is a mammal, the bird is going to live longer. So if we look at a house mouse, in captivity, where they live longer, they can live about 4 years. And that's it. This is a broad-billed hummingbird. Much smaller than a house mouse. How long do you think a broad-billed hummingbird can live? I already gave you a clue that they live longer than mammals.
12 years?
15. 20?
Well, I can't see. Oh, like 25?
There we go. 27. So yeah, quite a bit longer than the same size mammals. If we look at the European goldfinch, so, you know, we see goldfinches in the wild around the US. The European species, oh, wait, shoot. The European species, that's the 27 years. Who said 15 for the hummingbird? Anna?
Anna did.
Yep. You were right on. Sorry about that, guys. Ravens up to 69 years. And this is in the wild where they have to contend with predators and weather and migration. Now, the majority of individuals are not going to live to this maximum lifespan. The majority of wild animals across the board, it doesn't matter what type of animal it is, the majority of them will not make it to reproductive age. They won't make it to what we would call adulthood. And with birds, the fewer chicks they have per year, the longer they live. So if you've got something like a mallard, which can lay a dozen eggs every summer, their life expectancy is going to be a lot lower than something similar sized like a hawk, which is only going to lay, 3-4 eggs a year. Okay, so that is one of the things that we can learn from banding. We know how old wisdom is because she was banded before she was reproductive age. So we really have a good handle that she is, at least 71 years old. We can also look at migration patterns. So there's a hummingbird expert in South Carolina who bands birds in South Carolina most of the year. And his interest is hummingbirds. And so in the winter, he will go to Central America and capture hummingbirds, specifically trying to find hummingbirds that were banded in the US, so he can figure out where they overwinter. And I mean, he's probably the world expert in ruby-throated hummingbird migration patterns at this point. He's been doing it for decades at this point, and he has huge amounts of data from his work. But other people look at different types of birds and do the same kinds of trying to figure out where they migrate and when. We can estimate survival rates. So we know that most nestlings will not make it to adulthood. But by doing banding and then looking at recapture rates, we can kind of estimate what percentage of birds are making it to adulthood, get a better handle on the average life expectancy and that kind of information. This kind of work, the migration patterns, the survival rates, require a very large number of birds to be banded. And lots of effort into recapturing birds. The majority of birds that are banded, they're never recovered. Hang on a second, I've got numbers somewhere in my notes. For something like the birds pictured here, small songbirds, the recovery rate tends to be less than 1% of banded birds are recovered. But if we look at duck species, it can be as high as more than 10%. The reason for that is species that are hunted, hunters report the band information. So they're much more likely to find, so to speak, banded birds. Ducks in particular have really good information return rates because of the hunting group Ducks Unlimited. Daniel, I'm going to get to you in a second. Ducks Unlimited is a group that is trying to increase populations of wild ducks, and they are actually very successful at it. Daniel, were you going to talk about Ducks Unlimited?
No, I just had a question on, do they have similar laws against, like, if a hunter managed to get like a collared animal? Or are they more lenient with banded birds?
You are supposed to report them. I'm sure that the enforcement is variable depending on the state that they're in, and maybe even the local fish and wildlife guy who is supposed to be following up to make sure they report banded birds.
Okay.
We can also take blood samples from birds or feather samples during banding, and we can do this as a way to monitor diseases. If we're looking at avian influenza, we can look and see how many of the birds have antibodies against avian influenza in their bloodstream. So the bands are typically uncolored, so they just look like these metal bands here. They are different sizes. Obviously, a hummingbird is going to take a different band size than a Canada goose. Some of these types are available free of charge from the U.S. Geologic Survey. I know, why is the U.S. Geologic Survey in charge of bird banding? I'm sure it's historical reasons. Other times you will need to purchase them. We also have what are called field bands or auxiliary bands. And these can be various kinds of tags, streamers, neck collars, wing bands, electronic tracking devices that make it easier to identify individual birds without recapturing them. So when we look at geese, this is J969. This goose will always be J969. That letter number combination will never be used on another goose. And it allows you to recognize that individual without having to recapture them. Ronit.
That seems like a fairly wide band. Does it impact that goose's ability to use its neck?
Surprisingly, no. Yeah, they have to do a lot of research on these sorts of things to make sure that they're not going to impede survival. But yeah, that one to me looks like it could cause problems, but they don't. Here's a songbird that has a metal leg band, and then it has some colored bands. So this guy would be coded as right, red, left. I think you start from the top, black, white, blue. And through binoculars, you could spot these. And if you're doing a study on this particular bird, and maybe you're looking at nesting behavior or territoriality, you don't have to recapture them. You can identify them in the field. These are very common on shorebirds. They tend to be very easy to spot. And you can see this one's got an orange flag and then orange, yellow, blue on the leg, on the left leg. And then wing tags are often used in very large birds that tend to soar. So these tend to be used on eagles and California condors. So this guy is orange 47. Any of these birds that are marked in any of these ways, you can report to the bird banding laboratory.
Reporting like I saw it while I was out.
Yes. Yeah. These require an additional permit because you do need to know species specific requirements. What can the species tolerate? How many bands can fit on their leg? Like the geese, the neck bands, they're okay on Canada geese. Would they be okay on snow geese? We have to look into the specifics for specific species. Sometimes people use temporary markings like dyes. These are often used to mark recently caught birds. If you're capturing a large number of birds in a specific location, you can walk along and say you're looking at a hummingbird trap and the bird that's flown in has a dye mark on its forehead that shows that it has recently been banded. You can just let it go again. Reduce the stress level. And as I was mentioning, these kinds of markers are excellent for things like who's nesting with whom, mate fidelity. Are they sneaking around behind their mate and mating with neighbors? Most bird species do. It's very common in birds. Modern techniques, we can use DNA testing to show just how many of what we thought were monogamous species mate with multiple partners. This extra pair mating tends to go on because it increases the genetic diversity of the clutch, which increases the chance that at least some of the offspring will survive. We can look at territoriality. What area is a specific bird spotted in? Is there overlap between different marked individuals, or do they try and keep others out of their home range? Who's doing what on the nest? Who's building the nest? Who's sitting on the eggs? Who's raising the offspring? As a general rule, in bird species, most of the time, both parents, the mother and the father, participate in raising the chicks. The mother usually spends more time on the nest because she's not as colorful as the male. But there are other species like the cassowary where the male does the majority of the offspring care. The female lays eggs in his nest and she goes off. And he does all the work. There are also bands that are not produced or monitored by the U.S. Geologic Service. This is a pigeon leg band. So AU is issued by the American Pigeon Racing Union. You can see the date, 2022. So that was the year that bird was either born or banded. And then I'm sure there's more code around the corner that we can't quite see. These are put on pet pigeons, especially racing pigeons. if you find a bird with one of these bands, you can contact the owner. You can get their information from the American Racing Pigeon Union. Now, I've only found one banded and sick racing pigeon. I tracked down the owner. I contacted them. I said, I've got your bird. It's sick. I was doing rehab, so I was taking care of the bird. And he's like, yeah, just let it go when you're done. It'll find its way home. It's like, thanks, dude. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to spend all my time and effort on your pet when I'm trying to do wildlife rehabilitation. There can be state level bans for specific birds, especially hunted species like turkeys, quail. Bans can be issued by foreign governments. So you might find a bird that was banded under Mexican regulations or under Canadian regulations. You can still report those to the U.S. Geologic Survey. And then there are falconry bans. So you can see this guy has a band that's green, number 34, as well as a USGS band. These bands can be used to report lost falconry birds. Falconry birds do not behave the same way as wild birds. When I was doing rehab, we did get in a falconry bird. And it was so different from handling wild hawks. It was just, the behaviors were just completely weird. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing with this bird. He's not responding the way I expect him to. He was a special challenge. Cage birds can also be banded. These are not USGA bans. They don't regulate it or control it in any way. These bans will be put on usually by a breeder, and they may have information like the birth date, like this band has the year 2022. They may have information on the breeder. They might just have a number, which the breeder knows what it means, but nobody else does. There are probably also still some parrots out there that have plain round bands. So I know it sounds weird when I say round. These bands are kind of compressed side to side. When I say round, I mean more like what you would put keys on, completely circular ring. Those mark wild-caught, legally imported birds. And like I said, there are probably still parrots out there who have those bands. When we talk about bird banding, there are lots of legal requirements. Just like everything we do with birds, we have all of these restrictions in place to protect wild bird species. Bird banders need to have a federal permit. They may need to have a state permit. They may need to have a permit to set up at a specific location. Permits are only valid within a certain area. So if you've got a US permit, you can only use that in the United States. If you have a Massachusetts permit, you can only use that permit in Massachusetts. The guy I know who does Central American birds, he has a federal permit, and the countries that he does his work in during the winter, he'll capture a lot of birds, and any Native American species he can band. But he has permission from that country to use his US banding permit to do that. He's not allowed to band birds that are not native to America, to the United States. All of these permits require years of apprenticeship, a detailed research plan, exactly what you're looking for. Very careful records must be kept. And every band that you put on a bird, you have to fill out paperwork and report it to the bird banding laboratory. These permits allow short-term handling of the bird. No longer than 24 hours, no taking of nesting materials or eggs, and no transport of birds. So you can't capture a bird in Danvers and drive it down to Salem and release it. It has to be released where you caught it. Any questions on what we've talked about so far? Okay, I wanted to show you guys something. So this doesn't show me myself. View, show self, here we go. This is half of a California quail egg. So it's only half. If you can see this, I don't know if you can. There, shows up good on against my blue shirt. You see how this little bit of shell curls in and how it's a very nice, neat half of an eggshell? This is a hatched egg. That inward curl right at the edge is classic sign that it actually hatched rather than was predated. The fact that it's half of an eggshell that's intact also tells you that. I've been having a lot of quail in the yard this spring. I found this in my yard this morning. They obviously nested and at least one baby has hatched. I'm so proud. Okay, so on Thursday, we're going to finish up talking about bird banding. And then we're going to talk about falconry. And hopefully I'll be on time on Thursday. I will see you guys then.